Lily Lamont signed the Singapore partnership contract with her left hand, while her ex-husband married his mistress 3,000 miles away, and she didn't know which felt better. The boardroom was all glass and steel, 40 stories above Singapore's financial district, the kind of space designed to make you feel either powerful or insignificant, depending on which side of the table you sat. Lily kept her expression perfectly neutral as she reviewed the final page of the partnership agreement, even though her phone kept buzzing against the polished conference table like an angry wasp trapped under glass. She knew exactly what those messages were. She'd been expecting them all day, dreading them and anticipating them in equal measure. Across from her sat 3 Singaporean investors in custom suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mr. Tan, the lead investor, had that particular brand of wealth that didn't need to announce itself with flashy watches or loud conversation. Quiet money, old money, the kind that moved markets without making noise. His posture was perfect, his handshake had been firm but not aggressive, and his eyes calculated risk faster than most people could breathe. To Lily's right sat Dominic Ashford, the British architect she'd been working with for the past 8 months. He had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from expensive marble by someone who understood bone structure. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and a tendency to raise one eyebrow when something amused him or when he was calling bullshit on someone's presentation. He was doing it now, watching her phone vibrate for what had to be the 10th time in as many minutes. "Ms. Lamont," Mr. Tan said, his accent crisp and precise, every syllable landing exactly where it should, like a perfectly executed piano note. "We are very pleased with these terms. $400 million is a substantial commitment, as I'm sure you understand, but your portfolio speaks for itself. The sustainable housing project in Kuala Lumpur, the tech hub redesign in Bangkok, the waterfront development in Manila, these are exactly the kind of innovative approaches we want to bring to Singapore's urban planning." Lily picked up the Mont Blanc pen they'd provided, feeling its weight in her hand. Everything about this moment was expensive, important, hers. She'd earned this, built this, created this opportunity through late nights and early mornings, and work that no one had seen because she'd been too busy making someone else look good. "I don't do half measures, Mr. Tan. When I commit to a project, I deliver results that exceed expectations. That's not a promise. It's a track record you can verify with every client I've ever worked with." "We did verify it," Tan said with a slight smile, "which is actually why I wanted to mention something. We attempted to work with a Johnson Davis approximately 2 years ago." Lily felt her spine go rigid, even as her face remained perfectly calm. Years of practice keeping her expression neutral when every instinct screamed to react. Terrible instincts, that man. He overpromised on timeline, underdelivered on innovation, and seemed far more interested in attending networking events and playing golf than doing actual work. Frankly, his proposals were pedestrian at best. This sustainable smart city vision you've presented, the integration of green spaces with high-density housing, the water reclamation systems, the carbon-neutral transportation infrastructure, this was clearly your work all along, wasn't it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lily's phone buzzed again 3 times in rapid succession. She let the silence stretch for just a moment, long enough to be meaningful, but not so long it became awkward. "I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, Mr. Tan. I look forward to proving that confidence well placed." It wasn't a confirmation. It wasn't a denial. It was perfect. And from the slight nod Tan gave her, he understood exactly what she wasn't saying. She signed her name on the final page with steady hands. The ink was black, permanent, beautiful. Lily Lamont. Not Mrs. Johnson Davis, not Johnson's wife, not the woman behind the man, just her name, her signature, her $400 million deal that would reshape Singapore's waterfront and cement her reputation as one of Asia's most innovative urban planners. Her phone buzzed 3 more times in rapid succession, the vibration pattern insistent and desperate. The investors stood, shaking hands all around, making promises about site visits and progress reports and quarterly reviews. Mr. Tan's handshake was firm, brief, respectful, the handshake of someone who saw her as an equal, not as someone's former wife or someone's assistant or someone's anything, except what she actually was. Brilliant, capable, worth $400 million of their money. "We look forward to working with you, Ms. Lamont. And with you as well, Mr. Ashford," he added, nodding at Dominic with the same respect. They filed out of the conference room in their expensive shoes, trailing the scent of success and new money and possibility, leaving behind leather folders and embossed business cards and the promise of something extraordinary about to be built. The door clicked shut with a sound like finality, like a chapter ending, like everything changing all at once. Dominic crossed to the sideboard where someone had left champagne on ice. Good champagne, the kind with labels Lily recognized from Johnson's collection that he'd spent hours boring people about at parties while getting the vintage years consistently wrong. Dominic poured it into 2 crystal flutes, his movements unhurried and deliberate. The city sprawled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, all glittering lights and vertical ambition, and millions of lives being lived in stacked boxes that reached toward the sky, like humanity refusing to be limited by something as mundane as gravity. "You going to check that? Or are we pretending your phone isn't having some kind of electronic seizure on the table?" Lily picked up her phone, the screen illuminating her face in the dimming light of late afternoon. 15 messages now, all from the same wedding photographer's account, all photos, all documenting an event that was happening right this moment, right now, 3,000 miles away in Virginia, where it was morning and everything was exactly as Johnson had planned it. Johnson Davis in a black tuxedo that fit him perfectly because Lily had taught him which tailor to use, which measurements actually mattered, how to stand properly during fitting so the shoulders would sit right. Gabriel Martinez in white lace that probably cost $30,000 because Johnson always spent money he didn't earn on things that would photograph well for social media and industry publications. The venue decorated with roses the color of old money and baby's breath that cost more per stem than most people's entire grocery bills, arranged in patterns that took a team of florists 6 hours to execute. The same venue where Lily had married him 5 years ago, the exact same one. Same room, same views, same floral arrangements, probably even the same damn centerpieces, because Johnson had never had an original idea in his life that wasn't borrowed or stolen or copied from someone else. "Today's the day," Dominic said quietly, and it wasn't a question. He'd known this was coming. Lily had told him 3 weeks ago, her voice flat and matter-of-fact as she'd circled the date on their shared calendar. "Johnson's getting married. Same day, we close the Singapore deal. Funny how timing works out sometimes, isn't it?" "Ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. Eastern," Lily said, scrolling through the photos with a strange sense of detachment, like she was looking at someone else's life, someone else's past, someone else's mistake. "That was 2 hours ago. Reception should be starting right about now. Cocktail hour, probably. Open bar, string quartet, past appetizers that cost $40 per person. And you're here. I'm exactly where I choose to be." She set the phone face down on the table, but the screen kept lighting up underneath it, casting a glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, like something alive and insistent that refused to be ignored. "I could be there right now. I could have shown up in something spectacular and made a scene, ruined his day. That's what he probably expects, isn't it? The bitter ex-wife who can't let go, who shows up and objects during the ceremony, who makes everything about her pain instead of his happiness. Is that what you want? To ruin his day?" "What I want," Lily said slowly, choosing her words with the same care she'd chosen the materials for her Singapore project proposal, "is to never think about Johnson Davis again for as long as I live. What I want is to build something so extraordinary, so undeniably mine, that his name becomes nothing more than a footnote in my success story instead of me being a footnote in his. What I want is for people to say, 'Johnson Davis? Oh right, he used to be married to Lily Lamont before she left him and became legendary.'" Dominic studied her over the rim of his champagne flute, his eyes too knowing, too sharp, seeing past the careful composure to whatever was churning underneath. 8 months of working together had taught him to read her micro-expressions like other people read street signs, the slight tension in her jaw when something cost her effort to ignore, the way her spine went rigid and straight when someone mentioned Johnson's name in meetings, the careful blankness she wore like expensive armor when she was actually bleeding underneath and refusing to let anyone see. You know what I think? That I'm repressing my feelings and should probably scream into a pillow or break something expensive and therapeutic. I think you're terrifying. He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something almost warm, almost vulnerable. I think you spent 5 years being harmless, making yourself small and quiet and acceptable, letting someone else take credit for your brilliance while you worked in the shadows. And I think being terrifying suits you much, much better than being harmless ever did. Something loosened in Lily's chest, some knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She picked up her champagne glass, the crystal cold against her palm. To new partnerships. To women who know their worth and stop accepting anything less than they deserve. Chapter 2. The wedding toast that burned everything down. Johnson Davis heard his own eulogy at his wedding reception, delivered by a drunk friend who thought he was being complimentary. The ballroom was everything Gabrielle had wanted, white and gold and elegant and expensive, the kind of wedding that would photograph beautifully for Instagram and industry publications and make everyone who saw the pictures feel either inspired or inadequate, depending on their tax bracket. 200 guests, dressed in their finest and most uncomfortable clothes, the kind of people who mattered in the right ways, who had the right connections, who could move Johnson's career forward if he impressed them enough. The kind of wedding that cost more than most people's yearly salary and would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Johnson stood at the head table in his perfectly fitted tuxedo, his new wife beside him in her $30,000 dress that had required 6 fittings and a team of seamstresses working overtime, and he watched Raymond Cross rise unsteadily to his feet with a champagne flute in one hand and a grin that Johnson immediately recognized as dangerous. That particular grin meant Raymond was past the point of good judgment and heading rapidly toward the kind of honesty that destroyed relationships and ended careers. Raymond was drunk. Not falling down drunk, not slurring his words and forgetting names drunk, but that specific kind of wedding drunk where inhibitions disappeared like smoke and truths came tumbling out like rocks down a hillside, gathering momentum and destroying everything in their path. His bow tie was loose and crooked, his face flushed that particular shade of red that came from too much champagne on an empty stomach, and he was swaying slightly as he tapped his glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent with that particular quality of silence that only happens when 200 people stop talking at exactly the same moment, when every conversation dies mid-sentence and every head turns in the same direction. 200 faces looking at the man who'd been Johnson's roommate at Princeton, who'd been his best man at his first wedding to Lily, who'd witnessed the building of Johnson's empire from its foundation and knew exactly where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig some of the graves himself. "To Johnson," Raymond began, raising his glass high enough that champagne sloshed over the rim and dripped onto the white tablecloth like drops of liquid gold being wasted. "To Johnson Davis, who finally figured out what made him successful. Better late than never, right?" Polite laughter rippled through the ballroom like a wave that didn't quite crest, uncomfortable and uncertain. Johnson's smile felt plastic and painful, stretched too tight across his face, muscles aching from holding it in place all day while pretending everything was perfect. "No, but seriously though," Raymond continued, his voice carrying across the room with the particular projection of someone who'd had just enough alcohol to think he was being charming and funny instead of destructive. "Seriously, we all remember the Meridian contract, right? This was back in, 2019. Johnson nearly lost the whole damn thing, nearly blew a $15 million deal because he couldn't be bothered to prepare properly. The laughter stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The room went from uncomfortable politeness to dead silence in the space of a heartbeat. Gabrielle's hand tightened on Johnson's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging in through the expensive fabric of his jacket, hard enough that he'd probably have little crescent-shaped bruises tomorrow, little marks of this moment that would last longer than the marriage. "Terrible presentation," Raymond said, warming to his subject now, oblivious to the way the temperature in the room had dropped about 20 degrees. "I mean, genuinely terrible. Wrong numbers. Completely misread what the client actually wanted, used outdated market analysis that anyone with half a brain could have seen was wrong. We all sat in that pre-meeting, thinking we were about to watch a complete disaster unfold in real time. Johnson spent that whole weekend before the presentation golfing with those Henderson Group guys instead of actually preparing, and come Monday morning, we're all sitting in that conference room thinking we're about to witness a professional train wreck. Johnson's father, sitting 3 tables away with his new wife and her terrible adult children, leaned forward in his chair with the predatory interest of a shark smelling blood in the water. His expression was cold and calculating, the look he got when he was reassessing an investment he'd thought was sound and discovering it was built on sand. "But then Lily," Raymond said the name like it was the punchline to a joke he was about to tell, and several people around the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that said they knew this was going somewhere bad, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it now. Lily just fucking saved everything like she always did. She restructured the entire proposal in 48 hours, working around the clock while the rest of us slept. I remember it so clearly because she called me that Saturday night. Had to be 10 p.m., maybe later. I was at a bar in Georgetown. And she's asking for the Henderson financials, and I'm like, "Lily, it's Saturday night. This can't possibly wait until Monday." And she's like, "I need them right now, Raymond, because Johnson's about to lose a $15 million contract, and I'm the only one who can save it." The room had gone from silent to absolutely dead quiet now. The kind of quiet where you could hear people breathing, could hear the air conditioning cycling on with a mechanical hum, could hear someone's phone vibrating against a table 3 rows back. Johnson's mother had her hand over her mouth now, her eyes wide with horror, or maybe vindication. She'd never liked Lily, had always thought Johnson married beneath himself, but even she could see where this was going. She knew one of the client's daughters from some charity thing they both worked on, Raymond continued, completely unstoppable now, a boulder rolling downhill and crushing everything in its path. Called in a favor, completely rebuilt the entire financial model from scratch, rewrote the executive summary to actually address what the client cared about instead of what Johnson thought they should care about. She did in 2 days what Johnson couldn't do in 2 weeks. And then Monday morning, Johnson walks into that presentation with a proposal he hadn't even read, and Lily has to brief him in the parking lot for 30 minutes, just so he doesn't sound like a complete idiot in front of the clients. "Raymond," Johnson said quietly, trying to catch his friend's attention, trying to signal that this needed to stop right now before it went any further, before the grenade that had been thrown into the center of the room actually detonated. "Maybe we should—" "And coastal towers." Raymond rolled right over the objection like it didn't exist, building momentum now, his voice getting louder and more animated. God, coastal towers was even better. That whole project, that entire $50 million development that put Johnson on the map as a major player in commercial real estate, that was 100% Lily's relationship with the zoning commissioner. What was his name? Tom something. Asian guy, really nice, played golf but wasn't very good at it. "Tom Chen," someone called out from the back of the room, and a few people laughed nervously. "Tom Chen, exactly." Raymond pointed at whoever had spoken like they'd just won a prize. Lily played tennis with his wife Margaret every Thursday morning for 6 months just to build that connection. She had a whole strategy about it, showed up early every time, brought really good coffee from that place Margaret liked, remembered all her kids' names and their activities, asked about her elderly mother who was sick with something. Real relationship building, you know, the kind that actually matters. Meanwhile, Johnson didn't even know the guy's name when they finally met face to face to sign the actual contracts. Lily had to write it on his hand in the parking lot so he wouldn't forget and call him Tom Chan or Tom Cheng or something embarrassing. The room wasn't just silent anymore. It had moved past silence into something else entirely, into a kind of collective held breath, everyone waiting to see how bad this was going to get, how much more damage was going to be done before someone stopped Raymond or he finally passed out. So what I'm saying is, Raymond raised his glass even higher now, champagne still sloshing over the rim, his grin wide and dangerous and completely unaware that he'd just destroyed his best friend's wedding and possibly his entire remaining reputation. "Johnson, buddy, you picked the right woman the first time. Lily Lamont made you look like an absolute genius, made you look competent and brilliant and like you actually knew what you were doing. Made all of us look good by extension, honestly, because we got to ride on her coattails while Johnson took all the credit. Here's hoping Gabrielle's got the same magic, because let's be completely honest here, you're kind of useless without someone brilliant doing the actual heavy lifting while you smile for cameras and take credit for their work. Cheers to the happy couple." A handful of people raised their glasses out of pure social obligation and muscle memory, the automatic response to a toast, even when the content was absolutely devastating. Most of the room just stared at their drinks or their plates or their laps, avoiding eye contact with anyone else, especially with Johnson or Gabrielle. Johnson's mother had her entire face covered with both hands now. His business partners were exchanging glances that clearly said they were going to be having some very serious conversations first thing Monday morning. Gabrielle's sister was looking at Johnson with something that was equal parts pity and contempt and vindication. Johnson's father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard, like something breaking, like everything ending all at once. He walked out of the ballroom without looking back, without saying a word, without even a glance at his son sitting at the head table in his expensive tuxedo at his expensive wedding that was falling apart in real time. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Built Empires in Shadows. Dominic Ashford knew 4 things about Lily Lamont. She drank her coffee black at 5 in the morning. She never discussed her past. She was the most brilliant strategist he'd ever met, and she was lying about why she left America. The sound of the coffee machine grinding beans at 5:17 in the morning had become Dominic's alarm clock over the past 2 months. More reliable than any phone notification or clock radio, he'd wake to that mechanical whir and know immediately that Lily was already up, already working, already running from whatever demons chased her through whatever dreams she had during those few hours she actually let herself sleep. They'd been sharing this apartment since August, a practical arrangement while they established the Singapore office and built the foundation for what would eventually become Lamont Ashford. Separate bedrooms at opposite ends of the apartment, shared common spaces that neither of them used much except for the kitchen and the balcony. An unspoken agreement that personal history stayed locked in whatever boxes people kept their past in, and nobody asked questions that didn't need answers. It was a good arrangement, professional and clean and uncomplicated. Except Dominic was starting to suspect that his business partner was running from something with teeth, something that had caught up with her last night, something that had left her standing at the window at 5 in the morning, looking like she hadn't slept at all. He found her standing at the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city, coffee cup held in both hands like she was trying to draw warmth from it, despite the tropical heat that never really went away even at dawn, even with the air conditioning running at full blast. She was wearing yoga pants and an old t-shirt that said Cornell Engineering across the front in faded letters. Her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot that looked like she'd done it without looking in a mirror, looking nothing like the polished professional who'd signed a $400 million deal yesterday afternoon. Her phone was face up on the kitchen counter, where she'd apparently abandoned it, screen illuminated with notifications she was determinedly ignoring. 32 missed calls from the same unknown number with a Virginia area code, 14 voicemails that she hadn't listened to, 23 text messages that she hadn't opened, all from someone who very badly wanted to talk to her and wasn't getting the message that she didn't want to talk back. The ghost is getting really aggressive, Dominic observed mildly, starting his own coffee, because commenting directly on someone's obvious emotional distress seemed like exactly the kind of boundary violation that would end their working relationship. Whoever it is seems quite determined. Ghosts don't understand boundaries, Lily said, her voice flat and emotionless, the tone you'd use to discuss something that had stopped mattering to you a long time ago, even though you both knew that was a lie. That's kind of the defining characteristic of being dead and haunting people. No social awareness, no sense of when to leave well enough alone. Dominic had learned to read her moods over the past months, like a sailor learning to read weather patterns before they became storms. This was the dangerous kind, the calm before something destructive rolled through and leveled everything in its path. The kind of calm that meant she was barely holding it together, and one wrong word would shatter whatever control she was maintaining. He poured his coffee slowly and deliberately, added cream even though it was never cold enough in Singapore to need warming, and waited in silence. Giving her space to decide whether she wanted to open the door or keep it locked, whether she wanted to let him in or keep him at the professional distance they'd maintained since they started working together. "You want to talk about it?" he finally asked, when the silence had stretched long enough to become its own kind of answer. "No. Want me to answer next time they call and tell whoever it is to bugger off in creative and professionally devastating ways? I've got quite an extensive repertoire after years of dealing with difficult clients and ex-wives. I can be remarkably eloquent when telling people to fuck themselves." That got a small smile, barely there and gone almost before it arrived, but it was something. "I can fight my own battles, Dominic. I know you can. I've watched you dismantle men twice your size in negotiations, without them even realizing they've lost until the contracts are signed." He leaned against the counter, coffee cup warming his hands, even though the heat was already oppressive. "But knowing you can fight alone and wanting to fight alone are two different things. We're partners. That word means something, at least it does to me." Lily turned to look at him properly for the first time since he'd entered the kitchen, her dark eyes too sharp and too tired, seeing past all the careful professional boundaries to something underneath. "Why did you really leave London, Dominic? And don't give me the line about wanting new challenges in Asia. Nobody leaves a successful firm and a good reputation unless they're running from something." The question caught him completely off guard, which was probably exactly what she'd intended. They'd maintained such careful distance around personal history, both of them wearing their pasts like armor that nobody was allowed to see underneath. "I could ask you the same thing about Virginia." "I asked first." "Fair enough." Dominic took a long drink of his coffee, using the time to decide how much truth to offer, how many cards to show when they'd both been playing this game with their hands hidden for months. "My ex-wife was Natasha. We built this firm together, Ashford Sterling, 8 years in London, and when it ended, when the marriage just—" He stopped, started again. "She told everyone I'd been riding her coattails. Took the company, the reputation, all of it. Said every design was hers, that I was just—" "Was she lying?" Lily asked. Dominic's hands tightened on his coffee cup. "That's the thing. She wasn't entirely lying. I mean, she was exaggerating, but—" He looked away. "I did lean on her. More than I want to admit. There were projects where I'd let her handle the difficult clients because she was better at it. Let her fix my design problems because asking her was easier than figuring it out myself. And I told myself we were partners, that it was collaboration, but really I was taking the easy way, like Johnson did to you, just less extreme. That's not the same thing at all. Isn't it, though?" His voice had an edge now. "I didn't steal credit the way he did, but I definitely coasted on her abilities. When she left and took everything, I had to actually learn to do the work I'd been avoiding. That's why I came to Singapore. That's why I'm so obsessed with documenting everything now, with making sure credit is equal, because I know what it's like to be the person who wasn't pulling their full weight, and I fucking hate that I was that person." Lily's expression shifted into something that looked like understanding, like recognition, like finding someone else who'd been in the same fire and understood what the scars meant. My ex-husband, Johnson, did about 10% of the work and took credit for 100% of the results. When I left him and filed for divorce, I made absolutely certain that everyone knew the truth about who'd actually been doing the work. How did you do that? The smile that crossed Lily's face was sharp enough to draw blood and cold enough to freeze it. I called every major client and investor we had, every single one, sent them copies of proposals with my name in the document metadata, showing I was the original author, forwarded emails, showing my strategy memos that Johnson had presented as his own ideas, connected them directly with vendors and contractors who knew I was the one actually making decisions and managing projects while Johnson showed up to smile and shake hands. By the time I actually filed for divorce, Johnson's reputation was already crumbling. I just lit the match and walked away while everything burned. Dominic let out a low whistle. That's not leaving. That's scorched earth. That's salting the ground so nothing ever grows there again. He was sleeping with his secretary Gabriel in the office I designed for him while I was working 18-hour days to save his failing deals and keep his company from going under. Scorched earth felt proportionate. Scorched earth felt like the minimum he deserved. Her phone rang again, that same unknown Virginia number lighting up the screen. This time, instead of ignoring it, Lily picked it up and put it on speaker without answering. Just let it go to voicemail while they both listened. Johnson's voice filled the kitchen, desperate and raw and stripped of all the polish Dominic imagined he usually carried. Lily, please. I know you're getting these messages. I know you're ignoring me. But you need to understand what happened last night. Raymond gave this toast at the wedding. God, the wedding is ruined, everything is ruined. And he told everyone about Meridian and Coastal Towers and every other deal. He told them it was all you. He told them I couldn't do any of it without you. My father walked out without saying a word. Gabriel left me at the reception. The Taipei investors sent an email pulling out of the deal because they thought they were working with you, not me. Everyone knows now. Everyone knows I'm nothing without you. I need you to call me back. Please, I'm completely falling apart here and I need... Lily deleted the voicemail mid-sentence, cutting off Johnson's voice like switching off a light. Silence settled over the kitchen like dust after an explosion. Dominic waited, letting her process whatever she needed to process, giving her the space to fall apart if she needed to, or to stay strong if that's what she chose. That's the ghost, Lily said eventually, her voice carefully controlled. That's Johnson Davis, the man I spent 5 years of my life building into something that looked successful from the outside. He sounds completely desperate. He should be. I spent 5 years building his empire brick by brick while he took all the credit and all the glory. Now he has to try to maintain it himself, and he's discovering he has absolutely no idea how because he never actually learned to do the work. She set her phone face down with deliberate care. You know what the worst part is? I still feel guilty. Like maybe I went too far. Like maybe I should help him one more time. Like maybe I'm being cruel by letting him fail when I could save him if I wanted to. Were you vindictive when you left? Absolutely. I was deliberate and systematic and absolutely vindictive in making sure everyone knew the truth. Chapter 4. The man who discovered he was empty. Johnson Davis stared at legal papers claiming his ex-wife destroyed his company, and the only thing he could think about was whether she'd take his call if he was dying. The bankruptcy lawyer's office smelled like mahogany furniture polish and quiet desperation, the kind of desperation that came with hourly rates that could fund a small car payment, and the knowledge that even paying those rates probably wouldn't save you from the disaster you'd created. Johnson sat in a leather chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, across from 3 men in identical dark suits, who looked at him the way you'd look at a disappointing stock investment, with detached professional concern and absolutely zero personal investment in whether he succeeded or failed or disappeared entirely. The lawsuit against Ms. Lamont is your only remaining leverage at this point, the lead attorney said, sliding another document across the polished conference table with the kind of careful precision that cost $300 per hour. Your investors believe she systematically dismantled your client relationships before leaving the company. If we can prove corporate sabotage and malicious intent, you might be able to recover enough in damages to restructure the company rather than liquidating entirely. It's not a strong position, but it's the only position you have left. She didn't sabotage anything, Johnson said, and even to his own ears his voice sounded weak and unconvincing. She just told people the truth about who'd actually been doing the work. That's not sabotage. That's just honesty. Truth is remarkably subjective in corporate law, Mr. Davis. What actually matters in a courtroom isn't objective reality, but rather what we can prove and what narrative we can construct. What matters is demonstrating that she acted with malicious intent, specifically designed to damage your business interests. Whether that's actually true or not is almost beside the point. Johnson's COO, Patrick Chen, had resigned that morning via email, not even bothering with the courtesy of a phone call or an in-person meeting. His exit interview, conducted by HR because Patrick refused to speak directly to Johnson, had been brutally honest in ways that exit interviews almost never were. I stayed at this company because of Lily Lamont. She was the strategic vision behind every successful project we executed. She was the one who understood clients and markets and how to actually deliver results. Johnson was just the face we put on presentations, the person who showed up to smile and shake hands while the rest of us did actual work. I genuinely don't know why I pretended otherwise for so long. Professional courtesy, I suppose. Or maybe just cowardice. 3 major clients had followed Patrick out the door within hours. Their departure emails professionally worded but carrying the unmistakable subtext that they'd been working with Lily all along and had only tolerated Johnson because she'd asked them to. The Taipei deal was completely dead, $15 million in projected revenue vanishing like smoke. 2 other international projects had been put on indefinite hold pending leadership review, which was corporate speak for "we don't trust you anymore and we're looking for any excuse to terminate these contracts." Johnson's father had been even more direct during their dinner meeting the night after the wedding disaster. They'd met at the club where Johnson's father had been a member for 40 years, sitting in the same corner booth where they'd celebrated Johnson's Princeton acceptance and his first major deal and his wedding to Lily. Except this time there was no celebration, just 2 glasses of scotch and a conversation that felt like a professional execution. "I gave you every advantage a father could give a son," his father had said, his voice cold and controlled in that particular way that meant he was genuinely angry rather than just disappointed. "Princeton education, initial capital to start your company, introductions to every important person in my network, and you squandered all of it by taking credit for your wife's work for 5 years, while the rest of us apparently stood around being too polite or too stupid to notice." "I was the client-facing executive," Johnson had tried to explain, knowing even as he said it that the explanation was pathetic. "I managed relationships. I closed deals. I represented the company." You delivered her words, you presented her research, you took her strategies and her insights and her actual work, and you stood there smiling while everyone congratulated you for being so brilliant and capable. His father had taken a long drink of scotch. "Did you ever actually close a deal on your own, Johnson? Just once? Did you ever develop a strategy or cultivate a client relationship or solve a complex problem without Lily doing the actual intellectual work?" Johnson hadn't been able to answer that question then, sitting across from his father in that leather booth. He couldn't answer it now, sitting in this lawyer's office surrounded by documents that outlined the complete destruction of everything he'd thought he'd built. The Meridian contract. He'd spent that weekend golfing with clients while Lily had stayed home and completely rewritten the proposal. She'd called him Saturday night needing access to files and financial data, and he'd been annoyed at the interruption, had sent her the password she needed, and gone back to his scotch and his golf stories and his networking. Monday morning he'd walked into that presentation with a proposal he'd barely glanced at, And Lily had spent 30 minutes in the parking lot beforehand, feeding him talking points and key numbers and answers to questions she knew the clients would ask. He delivered her words, presented her analysis, taken credit for her brilliance, and when the clients had signed the contract, he'd accepted congratulations like he'd earned them. Coastal Towers, Tom Chen, the zoning commissioner. Johnson had met the man exactly twice, both times at events that Lily had arranged and managed. She'd spent 6 months building that relationship through his wife Margaret, playing tennis every Thursday morning, bringing expensive coffee, remembering birthdays and children's names and the details that made people feel seen and valued. Johnson had showed up to sign the final contracts and shake hands. Nothing more. The Taipei project. The Singapore expansion that Lily was now executing brilliantly without him. The tech partnership in Seoul. The sustainable housing initiative in Vancouver. One by one, Johnson mentally reviewed every major success of his career and found Lily's fingerprints all over every single one of them. Her strategy, her relationships, her insights, her work, and his name taking credit for all of it. He hadn't contributed anything except his presence, just his name on the door. Just his face in the presentations, just his unearned confidence that someone else's work was his to claim because she was his wife, and wasn't that basically the same thing as partnership? The realization didn't humble him. It didn't teach him a valuable lesson about humility and hard work. It eviscerated him, hollowed him out, left him sitting in this expensive chair in this expensive office, realizing that he had no idea who he actually was when you stripped away everything Lily had built for him. His phone rang. Gabrielle's name appeared on the screen. He answered with something that felt like desperate hope. "Gabrielle, please let me explain. I'm having the marriage annulled," she said, her voice flat and final. "I'm citing fraud in the legal paperwork. Misrepresentation of assets and capabilities. My lawyer says it's a strong case." "Gabrielle, please. Raymond was drunk. He was exaggerating. He was telling the truth. That's what you can't seem to understand, Johnson. He told everyone the truth about who you actually are, and you're still trying to pretend it was just drunken exaggeration." She paused, and he could hear her breathing. Could imagine her standing somewhere beautiful in clothes he'd probably paid for, with money he'd earned from work Lily had done. "You're still in love with her, aren't you? With Lily? That's what all of this is really about." Johnson opened his mouth to deny it automatically, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. Because he'd never stopped loving Lily, or at least loving what Lily had done for him. Loving the version of himself that existed when she was there to make him look brilliant and capable and successful. "That's what I thought," Gabrielle said quietly. "Goodbye, Johnson. I hope you figure out who you actually are without someone else building you into something impressive, but I'm not going to wait around to find out." The line went dead. His lawyer was watching him with something between pity and contempt, the way you'd watch someone drowning who jumped into the water voluntarily. "Mr. Davis, we really need to make a decision about the lawsuit against Ms. Lamont. Do you want to proceed or not?" Johnson thought about Lily in Singapore, finally free of him, building something extraordinary and putting her name on it in letters big enough for everyone to see. He thought about the lawsuit, about dragging her back into his disaster, about trying to destroy what she'd built because his own empire was crumbling. "The investors are demanding it," his lawyer pressed when Johnson didn't answer. "Without recovered damages from this lawsuit, there's no path forward except complete liquidation. You'll lose everything." "Do what you have to do," Johnson said finally, and the words tasted like ash and failure and the death of whatever better person he might have become if he'd just been brave enough to face the truth 5 years earlier. After the meeting, Johnson did something he hadn't done in years. He Googled his ex-wife, typed her name into a search engine, and actually looked at what she'd become without him holding her back. The results were overwhelming in ways that made his chest ache. Financial Times feature article, Bloomberg interview, Asian Architecture Digest cover story. Singapore Business Review profile calling her the strategic mind behind Southeast Asia's smart city revolution. Photos of her at groundbreaking ceremonies looking confident and powerful and free. Interviews where she spoke with an authority and certainty she'd always hidden during their marriage, or maybe not hidden but suppressed, because he'd needed to be the star, and stars can't share the spotlight without diminishing. And in every photo, standing beside her or slightly behind her or holding hard hats next to her at construction sites, was Dominic Ashford, award-winning architect, her business partner. In some photos his hand was on the small of her back. In others, they were laughing together at something only they understood. In one particular image that made Johnson's stomach turn, they were both wearing hard hats and looking at each other with an ease and comfort and genuine partnership that Johnson had never managed to achieve with Lily in 5 years of marriage. She'd replaced him, professionally and personally. She'd found someone who could actually stand beside her as an equal instead of standing on top of her while pretending it was partnership. Chapter 5. The fortress she built from his ashes. Lily Lamont saw her ex-husband at her construction site and felt nothing, which was more terrifying to him than if she'd screamed. The Singapore heat at 6:30 in the morning was already brutal, the kind of oppressive humidity that made breathing feel like work and turned expensive clothes into damp rags within minutes. But Johnson Davis looked cold standing at the entrance to her construction site, looked like all the heat had been sucked out of him and replaced with something hollow. Lily processed his presence with the clinical detachment she'd learned to apply to problems that needed solving. Expensive shoes now covered in construction site dust, wrinkled dress shirt that had probably been slept in, eyes that hadn't seen proper rest in what looked like days, the physical manifestation of a man coming apart at the seams. She stopped exactly 3 feet away from him, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain clear boundaries that said she wasn't interested in whatever desperation had brought him here. "You sued me. We're done talking." "Lily, please, just listen for one." "No, you had 5 years. 5 years of me listening and nodding and making your ideas sound better and fixing everything you broke, and I'm done. That account is closed. It's empty. You don't get to. The lawsuit wasn't my idea." "I don't care. I don't care whose idea it was. You you put your name on those papers. The investors demanded it. They think that you stole company assets, and I stole nothing." Her voice rose. "I took what was mine, my strategies, my relationships, my work, and I left you with what was yours." She stopped, which was apparently nothing. "I never wanted this. I told them not to. But they're not listening anymore. They don't think I can." "Can't what?" Lily's voice went cold. "Can't run a company without me? Can't close deals without my strategy? Can't maintain relationships you never actually built? Which specific part of your... Tell me which part we're discussing right now." "Lily, please. You have 30 seconds to explain why you're at my construction site before I have security physically remove you. And I promise you that will be deeply embarrassing for both of us, but significantly more so for you." Johnson's desperation broke through whatever composure he'd been trying to maintain. The words came tumbling out in a rush, unfiltered and raw. "I made a terrible mistake. With Gabriel, with everything, with how I treated you for 5 years. I didn't appreciate what we had, what you did for me, how much you sacrificed to make me look good. I know I took credit for your work. I know I was a terrible husband, but please, just give me 5 minutes to explain, to make you understand." "No." The single word hung in the humid air between them like something physical. Lily watched it land, watched it destroy whatever hope Johnson had been carrying that had made him fly halfway around the world to have this conversation. Dominic arrived at her side then, not touching her but standing close enough that his presence shifted the entire geometry of the confrontation. His body language made it clear this wasn't just a business partnership anymore, that whatever existed between him and Lily went deeper than contracts and profit sharing. Johnson looked at Dominic, then back at Lily, and understanding dawned across his face like a sunrise illuminating something he'd tried not to see. "That was fast," Johnson said, and bitterness leaked through the desperation in his voice. "How long were you two planning this before you left me? How long was this affair going on while you were still wearing my ring and sleeping in my bed?" Lily moved before her brain fully processed the decision. Her palm connected with Johnson's face with a crack that echoed across the construction site, sharp and clear in the morning air. Silence fell like a physical weight. 50 construction workers stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. "I was alone for 5 years in our marriage," Lily said, her voice shaking now, but not with tears, with rage, with years of suppressed fury finally finding an outlet. "I spent 5 years working 18-hour days to build your reputation while you took credit and mistresses and every advantage I handed you. I've been divorced from you for 8 months. 8 months. If I find someone who actually sees me, who values my work, who treats me like an equal partner instead of an unpaid employee, that is none of your business. You don't get to have opinions about my life anymore. You gave up that right when you decided your secretary was more important than your marriage vows." Johnson's face was red where she'd hit him, the mark of her hand visible like a brand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but if you'd just talk to me—" "About what?" Lily stepped closer, and Johnson actually flinched backward. "About how you slept with Gabriel in the office I designed for you while I was saving your Meridian contract. About how you took me to that wedding venue for our wedding ceremony, made promises you never intended to keep, and then brought your mistress to the exact same place and used the exact same florist. Or maybe we should discuss how you're suing me for $50 million, because your investors finally figured out you're completely incompetent without me doing all the actual work." "I'll drop the lawsuit. I swear I'll drop it. I'll drop everything. Just please." Lily stepped even closer, her voice dropping to something deadly quiet that somehow carried further than shouting ever could. "You have nothing I want, Johnson. Not your apology, not your company, not your name, not your promises that you've already proven are worthless. Drop the lawsuit or don't drop it. Either way, I'm going to win, because I'm actually good at what I do, and you're just good at taking credit for other people's brilliance. The difference between us is that I can stand on my own, and you just discovered you can't." Johnson grabbed her wrist then, not hard but desperate, the gesture of a drowning man reaching for anything that might save him. "I know about the cancer." The construction site went completely still. Every worker within earshot heard those words. Dominic's expression shifted from protective to shocked. Lily looked down at Johnson's hand on her wrist, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. "Let go of me right now." "Why didn't you tell me?" Johnson's voice broke completely. "You went through that alone. You were diagnosed and treated and you survived, and you never told me. Why didn't you let me help you? Why didn't you let me be there for you?" "Because you would have made it about you." Lily's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "Because you would have played the supportive husband role for cameras and dinner parties while I did all the actual work of surviving. Because you would have told everyone how hard it was for you to watch me go through treatment. Because you would have weaponized my illness to make yourself look noble and caring when you were neither of those things. So I fought cancer alone, and I beat it alone, and I filed for divorce before you could turn my survival into your redemption story. I wouldn't have. Yes, you would have. Just like you made our anniversary about your golf tournament schedule. Just like you made my promotion about how it reflected well on your leadership. Just like you made our entire marriage about your career and your success and your image. Everything is about you, Johnson. Even now, standing at my construction site after suing me, you're still making this about your pain and your loss and your needs. You haven't changed at all. You've just run out of people willing to pretend you have." Dominic spoke for the first time, his British accent cutting through the tension with surgical precision. "I think you should leave now. This conversation is over." Johnson looked at Dominic with pure hatred, the kind that came from knowing you'd been replaced by someone better in every measurable way. "Stay out of this. This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Lily corrected coldly. "And Dominic's absolutely right. You need to leave my construction site immediately." "I'll lose everything," Johnson said, and the naked desperation in his voice would have moved her once, back when she'd still believed love meant saving people from the consequences of their own actions. "The company's going bankrupt. My father won't return my calls. Gabrielle filed for annulment after 3 days. I have nothing without you, Lily. Please, I'm begging you. Lily looked at the man she'd married 5 years ago in that same venue he'd just used to marry someone else. The man she'd built into something that looked impressive from the outside while remaining invisible herself. The man who'd taken her light and called it his own for so long that he'd actually started believing the lie. And she felt absolutely nothing except a distant echo of who she used to be, the woman who would have folded, would have helped one more time, would have sacrificed herself again to save him from himself. That woman was dead. Lily had killed her deliberately and built someone new from the ashes. Now you know how I felt every day of our marriage, she said quietly. Welcome to irrelevance, Johnson. It's lonely here, isn't it? It's terrifying to be invisible, to be nothing, to realize that nobody sees you as anything except a means to an end. 5 years I felt that way, every single day, and you never noticed because you were too busy enjoying the spotlight I was shining on you. She turned and walked away. Dominic stayed for a moment longer, facing Johnson with an expression that promised consequences if this conversation ever happened again. If you contact her again through any means, I'll handle it personally, and I promise you, I won't be nearly as kind as she just was. Then he followed Lily toward the office trailers, leaving Johnson standing alone in the dust, while 50 construction workers stared at him with unconcealed contempt, watching a man realize in real time that he'd destroyed the only thing that had ever made him special. Inside the trailer, Lily's hands started shaking. The adrenaline crash hit her all at once, making her knees weak and her breathing uneven. Dominic closed the door, giving her privacy to fall apart if she needed to. You didn't tell me about the cancer, he said quietly, not accusatory, just stating a fact. I don't advertise my medical history to business partners. I'm not asking as a business partner. I'm asking as someone who cares whether you're all right. I'm in remission. The prognosis is excellent. I'm fine. That's not what I asked, Lily. She sank into a chair, the fight draining out of her all at once. He found out somehow. I don't know how. Maybe my mother told someone who told someone, but he knows, and now he'll use it. He'll tell people I was sick, that I wasn't thinking clearly when I left him, that the divorce was a mistake I made while going through treatment and dealing with fear and mortality. Let him try. Everyone on this construction site just watched you handle him with more strength and clarity than most healthy people could manage. Medical records are private. He can speculate all he wants. He can't prove anything without your explicit consent, which you'll never give. Lily accepted the bottle of water Dominic handed her. Thank you for standing with me just now. That's what partners do. We stand together. Through the trailer window, they watched security finally escort Johnson off the property. Lily's phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. Davis investors just increased lawsuit to $75 million, adding corporate espionage charges. This is going to be a long fight. Could take 18 months minimum. Call me. Lily showed the message to Dominic. He swore creatively in British. They're escalating because they think pressure will make you fold. Will you fold? She thought about the woman she'd been during her marriage to Johnson, the one who'd folded constantly, who'd made herself small so he could feel big, who'd worked until 3 in the morning while he slept peacefully, the one who'd hidden a cancer diagnosis because she'd known he'd make it about himself. That woman was gone. Dead. Burned away deliberately. No, I won't fold. I'll fight this lawsuit for however long it takes, and I'll win. Chapter 6. The siege that broke differently. Johnson Davis didn't leave Singapore, but he stopped chasing Lily and started chasing the truth about who he actually was without her. Johnson's hotel room smelled like failure and stale air conditioning, the kind of small space that cost too much money and provided too little comfort. Perfect for a man whose life had collapsed so completely that he couldn't figure out where home was anymore. He'd been in Singapore for 8 days now, each one stripping away another layer of the person he'd pretended to be for so long that he'd forgotten he was pretending. The slap still burned on his face sometimes, phantom pain that had nothing to do with physical impact and everything to do with the memory of 50 construction workers watching him get exactly what he deserved. He wasn't going back to Virginia. There was nothing there except an empty house that Gabriel had already moved her things out of, and a company that was being liquidated piece by piece like a corpse being picked clean by vultures. His assets were frozen pending the lawsuit his investors were pursuing against his explicit wishes. His father had called exactly once in the past week, a brief conversation that consisted entirely of, "Until you figure out who you actually are without taking credit for other people's work, don't contact me. I'm embarrassed to call you my son." So Johnson did something he'd never done in his entire adult life. He got a real job. The architectural firm was small, tucked away in a renovated shophouse in Chinatown that smelled like jasmine and coffee and honest work. 3 partners, maybe a dozen employees working out of an open floor plan that encouraged collaboration instead of hierarchy. They needed a project coordinator, entry-level work, administrative tasks, the kind of position Johnson would have laughed at during his marriage to Lily, the kind of position he desperately needed now. The interview was humiliating in ways Johnson hadn't expected. Grace Leong, the lead partner, was maybe 10 years younger than him, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd actually earned their success. She looked at his resume with raised eyebrows that said she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "You're significantly overqualified for this position, Mr. Davis. I'm aware of that. So why would you possibly want to work here doing administrative coordination for 2,500 Singapore dollars a month?" Johnson made a choice in that moment to try something he'd almost never done before. Complete honesty. "Because I need to learn how to actually do work instead of taking credit for other people's efforts. Because I've spent my entire career being a figurehead, being the face of a company, while other people did all the actual intellectual labor, and I don't know how to be anything else. Because if I don't start over from the absolute bottom and learn to do the work nobody sees, I'll never understand what I actually am without someone else building my reputation for me." Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're the man who showed up at Lily Lamont's construction site last week and got slapped in front of her entire crew. Everyone in Singapore's architecture community is talking about it. The story's already become legendary." "Yes, that was me." "Good for her," Grace said simply. "You're hired. 2,500 a month, no benefits, and you'll do whatever we tell you to do without complaint or ego. If you bring your entitlement to my office, if you try to take credit for anyone else's work, if you make any of my female employees uncomfortable or talk over them in meetings, you're immediately fired. Understood?" "Understood." He started the next day. The work was tedious and unglamorous. Organizing files, scheduling contractor meetings, updating project management software, making coffee runs, doing the 1,000 invisible tasks that kept a business running but never got acknowledged. The kind of work Lily had probably done in her sleep while he'd been playing golf with clients she'd cultivated for him. He was terrible at it initially, kept forgetting details, messing up schedules, making mistakes that required other people to fix his errors. His studio apartment cost 1,800 Singapore dollars a month, which left him 700 for food and transportation and everything else. He learned to cook rice and vegetables because eating out was too expensive. He rode the MRT instead of taking taxis because he couldn't afford the convenience anymore. He bought clothes at Uniqlo instead of having them custom-tailored because his credit cards were maxed out and his bank accounts were frozen. For the first time in his adult life, Johnson Davis was completely ordinary, average, forgettable, and it was absolutely destroying him in ways he hadn't anticipated. His court-mandated therapist was a Singaporean woman named Dr. Raj, who didn't believe in coddling her patients or letting them hide behind comfortable lies. "Your investors want you attending therapy to demonstrate mental fitness for the lawsuit proceedings, but I'm not here to help you win in court. I'm here to help you understand why you ended up here in the first place and whether you're actually capable of becoming someone different. I ended up here because my wife left me. Your ex-wife left because you exploited her labor for 5 years while simultaneously having an affair with your secretary. Those are consequences of your actions, not causes of your problems. Try again. Johnson spent 6 weeks in twice-weekly therapy sessions that felt more like controlled demolitions than conversations, systematically dismantling every comfortable lie he'd told himself about who he was and what he'd accomplished. Dr. Raj made him create detailed lists of every major project from the past 5 years, then forced him to honestly identify his actual contributions versus Lily's work versus other team members' efforts. The results were devastating. Meridian contract, Lily restructured proposal, managed client relationships, handled all technical negotiations. Johnson attended final presentation and smiled for photographs. Coastal towers. Lily built relationship with zoning commissioner over 6 months, navigated complex regulatory requirements, managed community board concerns. Johnson signed contracts and gave one speech at the groundbreaking. Taipei deal, Lily developed complete strategy, coordinated with international partners, structured all financial terms. Johnson attended 3 dinners and shook hands. "You were a mascot," Dr. Raj said after reviewing his lists, her tone clinical rather than cruel. "Mascots don't run companies. They wave from the sidelines while other people play the game. Did you love her, Johnson?" Johnson opened his mouth to say yes automatically, the response he'd given 1,000 times to people who'd asked over the years. But he stopped, actually thought about the question, and realized with horrifying clarity that he'd never actually known what love meant. "I loved what she did for me. I loved feeling successful and important and impressive. I loved the version of myself that existed when she was there to make me look brilliant." That's not loving a person. That's using a person. I know that now. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Lily's crisis was exploding across Singapore business news and international architecture publications. A government official had publicly accused her of bribing a zoning inspector to fast-track building permits for her smart city project. The accusation came with documentation that looked legitimate. Bank transfers, witness statements, enough manufactured evidence to trigger a formal criminal investigation that could result in prison time and complete destruction of everything she'd built. Johnson knew immediately the accusations were fabricated because he recognized the tactic. He'd seen his old investors use these exact methods against smaller competitors who threatened their market share, manufacture a crisis, apply maximum pressure, force settlement or capitulation before anyone could properly investigate the claims. And Johnson had proof they were lying. When he'd been forced out of his own company, his lawyers had negotiated limited access to company servers as part of his shareholder agreement, mostly so he could retrieve personal files and correspondence. But that access also included the private email server where his investors conducted their most sensitive communications, the ones they didn't want showing up in discovery during lawsuits. Buried in those emails were conversations from the past 2 weeks about how to neutralize the Lamont threat and create sufficient leverage for lawsuit settlement. They'd manufactured the bribery accusation specifically to pressure Lily into dropping her legal defense and possibly even paying them to make the criminal charges disappear. Johnson could give her those emails, could save her, could prove her innocence and expose his investors' criminal conspiracy. But doing so meant betraying confidential company information in ways that would result in criminal charges against him. Corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, violation of multiple confidentiality agreements. He'd face at least 18 months in prison, possibly more. Dr. Raj asked him what he was going to do during their next session. "I don't know. If I help her, I go to prison for a long time. If I don't help her, she could go to prison for something she didn't do, something my investors manufactured specifically to destroy her." What would the old Johnson Davis do? He knew the answer immediately, instinctively, the pattern so deeply ingrained it was almost automatic. Protect himself. Let her burn. Rationalize it by saying she left me, she destroyed my reputation, she doesn't deserve my help. And what does the Johnson Davis sitting in my office right now want to do? Johnson thought about Lily at that construction site, her hand still shaking slightly after she'd slapped him. Thought about 5 years of her invisible labor that had built his entire career. Thought about how she'd faced cancer alone because she'd known he'd weaponize her illness for sympathy and attention. Thought about what kind of person he'd been and what kind of person he might still be capable of becoming if he just made one truly selfless choice. I'm going to give her the emails. Chapter 7. The Debt. No one wanted. Lily Lamont had two choices: let her empire burn or ask the man who destroyed her for help, and both options felt like dying. The emails arrived anonymously at first, forwarded through a burner account that had been created that same day and would probably be deleted within hours. No message, no explanation, just file attachments that appeared in Dominic's inbox while Lily was sitting across town in a government office being interrogated about bribery charges she hadn't committed. 23 emails in total, all with official company headers, all discussing in explicit detail how to manufacture evidence and pressure Lily Lamont into legal submission. Dominic opened them on his laptop with hands that weren't quite steady, reading through corporate communications that outlined a conspiracy so blatant it would have been almost funny if the consequences weren't so devastating. The emails were dated and time-stamped, digitally signed with authentication headers that would hold up in court. They showed Johnson's investors, men with impressive titles and expensive lawyers, discussing exactly how to fabricate a bribery accusation, which government officials could be paid to make formal complaints, how much money would need to change hands to create a paper trail that looked legitimate enough to survive initial investigation. These came from Johnson's company servers, Dominic said, when Lily returned to the office 3 hours later, looking exhausted and angry and like she was barely holding herself together. Only someone with administrative access would be able to retrieve internal communications like this. The metadata shows they were downloaded yesterday evening Singapore time. Lily read through the emails with an expression that moved from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been grief if she'd let herself feel it. He sent these. Johnson sent them. Almost certainly. His lawyer called while you were gone. Dominic pulled up the voicemail on speaker. Johnson Davis was arrested this morning for corporate espionage and breach of confidentiality agreements. His investors claim he stole proprietary documents specifically to help you fight their lawsuit. They're pursuing the maximum criminal penalties, 18 months minimum, possibly more depending on what other charges they can make stick. They're not wrong about what he did, Lily said quietly, still scrolling through the emails that would completely exonerate her of the bribery charges and expose the people trying to destroy her reputation. He absolutely stole confidential company communications and forwarded them to us. That's textbook corporate espionage. Yes, but his motive matters. He wasn't stealing trade secrets or competitive intelligence. He was providing evidence that prevents a miscarriage of justice. Any decent judge should be able to see the difference. Lily set down her phone and looked at Dominic with something raw and vulnerable breaking through her usual composure. I don't want to owe him anything. I spent 5 years owing him nothing while he owed me everything, and now suddenly I'm in debt to the man who took credit for my work and destroyed my marriage and is currently suing me for $75 million. This feels like a trap. This feels like manipulation. You don't owe him anything, Dominic said firmly. He made a choice to do the right thing for once in his life. That choice doesn't obligate you to anything except maybe acknowledging that he did it. My lawyer says I could testify on his behalf. Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. I could explain to the court that he was correcting false information that his investors deliberately planted, that he was exposing criminal conspiracy rather than stealing company secrets. It might be enough to get the charges reduced or even dismissed entirely. And if you testify, his lawyers will absolutely tear you apart. They'll claim you manipulated him, that this is corporate sabotage on your part, that Johnson is emotionally compromised because of your shared history. They'll drag out every detail of your marriage and divorce. They'll probably try to make the cancer diagnosis relevant somehow. This could take 2 years to resolve and destroy your reputation in the process. Or I could let him go to prison for finally doing something decent after years of being consistently terrible. Dominic watched her carefully, reading the conflict written across her face. What does your gut tell you? Lily thought about Johnson in that vision board she'd glimpsed through his apartment window, systematically deconstructing his own ego piece by piece, annotating each professional success with brutal honesty about who'd actually done the work. She thought about him getting a real job and riding the MRT and learning to be ordinary after decades of pretending to be extraordinary. She thought about the choice he'd made, knowing it would cost him his freedom. I need to see him. Before I decide anything, I need to look him in the eye and understand why he did this. The jail was utilitarian and depressing, all harsh fluorescent lights and metal chairs bolted to concrete floors, and the overwhelming smell of institutional cleaning products trying to mask other smells nobody wanted to think about. Johnson was brought out wearing standard-issue clothing that didn't fit properly, his face unshaven, hair disheveled, looking like someone had taken everything that used to be polished and expensive about him and stripped it down to whatever was underneath, which turned out to be fairly ordinary and deeply exhausted. They sat across from each other with a table between them that might as well have been a continent, separated by everything that had been and everything that could never be again, 5 years of marriage and 8 months of divorce, and a lifetime of choices that couldn't be taken back no matter how much either of them might wish otherwise. You didn't have to come here, Johnson said, his voice hoarse like he'd been crying or screaming or maybe both. You didn't have to send those emails and throw yourself on a grenade for me. Yes, I did. They were lying about you, manufacturing evidence to destroy everything you'd built. I couldn't let that stand. Lily studied him carefully, looking for the manipulation she'd gotten so good at spotting during their marriage, the performance he'd put on when he wanted something from her. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse if she let herself believe he was capable of it. Why, Johnson? You're facing 18 months in prison minimum. You could have just ignored it, let me fight my own battles. Why would you sacrifice your freedom for me after everything that's happened between us? Because I spent 5 years taking credit for your light while you worked in darkness, Johnson said, and his voice cracked on the words. And then you left and I sat in that same darkness, and I realized I had absolutely no idea how to make light of my own. I've been sitting in that darkness for 8 months now, going to therapy twice a week, working an entry-level job, learning to be nobody special, and I'm finally starting to understand something I should have understood years ago. What's that? Because I spent 5 years. Johnson stopped, tried again. I took credit for everything you did, all of it. And then you left and I was just sitting there in the dark and I realized I have no idea how to... He couldn't finish the sentence. I've been going to therapy, twice a week. Dr. Raj, she makes me look at everything I did and I can't escape it anymore. What I was, what I did to you. What's that supposed to mean to me? It means... He struggled with the words. Love isn't supposed to be... It's not a transaction, right? It's not one person doing everything while the other person just takes. I didn't love you. I loved what you could do for me. How you made me look. And I called it marriage, but it was just... He looked down at his hands. I used you. I exploited you. Whatever comfortable word I was using to avoid saying it, that's what it was, and I'm sorry. Not because I got caught or because I lost everything. I'm sorry because you deserved so much better and I was too selfish to even see what I was doing. Lily felt something shift in her chest, some knot she'd been carrying for years, suddenly loosening just slightly. Not forgiveness. That was still too far away, might always be too far away. But maybe the beginning of letting go, of releasing the anger that had sustained her through the divorce and the move to Singapore and the building of her new life. The emails you sent will completely clear my name. My lawyer says the criminal investigation will be dropped within days. You saved me. That doesn't mean you owe me anything. My lawyer also says I could testify on your behalf, explain to the court that you were exposing criminal conspiracy rather than stealing company secrets. It might be enough to get you acquitted or at least reduce the charges significantly. Don't do it. Johnson's response was immediate and firm. Don't testify for me. Don't get pulled back into my disasters. You've already saved me once by telling me the truth at that construction site, by slapping me in front of 50 people and making me see myself clearly for the first time in years. I don't deserve you saving me again. This isn't about what you deserve, it's about what's true and what's right. Then let the truth be this. I finally did something decent after years of being consistently terrible, and I'm willing to face the consequences of my past actions. If I go to prison, maybe I'll finally have time to figure out who I actually am without anyone else building me into something I'm not. Lily leaned back in the uncomfortable metal chair, processing this new version of Johnson, who took responsibility instead of making excuses, who accepted consequences instead of finding someone else to blame. You've changed. Actually changed, not just performed change to get what you want. I'm trying to change. It's harder than anything I've ever done, and I'm doing it badly most days, but I'm actually trying for the first time in my life. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd shared 5 years of marriage without ever really knowing each other, finally seeing each other clearly through the wreckage of everything they'd built and destroyed together. I'm going to testify, Lily said finally, not to save you or because I think we can be friends or because I forgive you for what you did during our marriage. I'm testifying because letting you go to prison for finally doing the right thing would make me complicit in an injustice, and I'm not willing to be that person no matter how much you hurt me. Lily, don't thank me. Just become someone worth the sacrifice. Build something real with your own hands. Learn to stand on your own. And never contact me again unless you've actually become the person you should have been all along. The trial stretched over 6 months, a complex legal battle that made headlines in both Singapore and American business publications. Lily testified clearly and without emotion, explaining that Johnson had provided evidence of fraud and conspiracy rather than stealing legitimate trade secrets. She admitted publicly that she'd called clients when she left her marriage, that she'd been vindictive in making sure everyone knew the truth about who'd actually done the work. But she also made it clear that Johnson's actions had exposed genuine criminal behavior by his investors, that he'd sacrificed his freedom to prevent an innocent person from being prosecuted for crimes she didn't commit. The judge wasn't particularly sympathetic to Johnson, but recognized the distinction between corporate espionage for personal gain and whistleblowing to prevent injustice. Johnson was acquitted of the espionage charges but found guilty of confidentiality violations. The sentence was substantial fines, permanent severance from his company, and community service rather than prison time. When he was released, Johnson had literally nothing left. No company, no money, no reputation beyond being the cautionary tale about men who take credit for women's work. But he had something he'd never possessed before, actual integrity, earned through suffering and genuine change. He sent Lily one text message. "Thank you for the testimony. I won't contact you again. You deserve a life where I'm not even a footnote." She didn't respond, but she didn't block his number either. 6 months later, Lily saw him at a coffee shop. Chapter 8. The Queen's Impossible Choice. Lily Lamont spent 5 years being invisible for a man who took everything, and now she had to decide if she'd be visible for a man who'd lost everything. The conference invitation arrived 6 months after Johnson's trial concluded, arriving in her email inbox with professional letterhead and carefully worded paragraphs that made the request sound reasonable, even though it absolutely wasn't. The Singapore Ethics in Business Conference wanted Lily to deliver a keynote speech about uncredited labor in corporate environments, about what happens when brilliant people do invisible work while others collect visible praise. They'd also invited Johnson Davis to participate in a panel discussion titled Men Confronting Complicity in Corporate Culture, where he'd apparently agreed to discuss his own failures publicly as a cautionary tale for other men who might be exploiting their partners or colleagues without fully recognizing what they were doing. Lily was reviewing the invitation in her office when Dominic appeared in the doorway with lunch. Spicy laksa from their favorite hawker center 3 blocks away, the kind that made your nose run and cleared your sinuses and tasted like Singapore felt. hot and complex and impossible to replicate anywhere else in the world. "You look troubled," he observed, setting down the containers on her desk and claiming the chair across from her with the easy familiarity of someone who'd earned their place in her life through consistent action rather than empty promises. "Singapore Ethics Conference wants me to keynote about uncredited labor and invisible work," Lily said, sliding the invitation across the desk so he could read it himself. "They've also invited Johnson to speak on a panel about male complicity in taking credit for women's work. We'd be at the same conference, probably crossing paths multiple times over 3 days." Dominic read through the invitation carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than immediately reactive. "How do you feel about sharing professional space with him after everything that's happened?" "I genuinely don't know. Part of me thinks it could be healing, like closing a chapter properly instead of just letting it end in courtroom testimony and awkward silence. Part of me thinks it's performative nonsense, turning real pain into professional development content for people who'll forget everything they learned within a week. What does your gut tell you?" Lily's gut said this was important, not for Johnson, but for every woman sitting in the audience who'd been doing invisible labor while someone else collected visible rewards, who'd been making someone else look brilliant while staying in shadows themselves. "I think I should do it. Then I'll be in the front row." But 2 weeks before the conference, Dominic's carefully constructed world imploded in ways neither of them had anticipated. His phone rang at 3 a.m. Singapore time, the kind of call that was never good news. Lily woke to find him sitting on their apartment balcony with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking slightly, in a way that meant he was either crying or trying very hard not to. "That was my lawyer in London," Dominic said when she joined him outside, his voice rough. "Natasha is suing me. She's claiming I stole, that I used designs from our London firm for Lamont Ashford. She wants half our profits, 2 years of profits plus damages. She has emails from when we were married, sketches I sent her, and she's saying—" He stopped, couldn't seem to finish. "That's absurd. Every design we've done is fully documented as collaborative." "Is it absurd, though?" Dominic turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression she'd never seen before. Anger, but directed inward. "Because I did send her those sketches. I did ask, 'What do you think of this?' on probably every major project. And now I'm looking at these emails, and I can see how she's framing it, how she's making it look like I couldn't design anything without her input. And the worst fucking part is—" His voice cracked. "The worst part is she's not completely wrong." Lily sat beside him. "Asking your spouse for feedback isn't—" "I'm not talking about feedback." The words came out harsh, louder than he meant. He stood up, paced to the edge of the balcony. "I'm talking about me being lazy, about me taking the easy way, because Natasha was brilliant, and why struggle through a problem when I could just ask her? I did the same thing I hate Johnson for doing to you, not to the same degree, but I still did it, and now it's going to destroy everything you've built because you were stupid enough to partner with someone who has the same fucking flaw. That's not— You should dissolve the partnership." He said it flat, final. "Before this gets worse, before her lawsuit freezes all our assets. You could start fresh without me dragging you down." Lily stared at him. "Are you seriously suggesting I abandon you right now?" "I'm suggesting you protect yourself. You spent 5 years cleaning up Johnson's messes. You don't need to spend the next 2 years cleaning up mine. This isn't the same thing, and you know it." "How is it different?" Dominic turned back to her, and his face was raw. "How is me coasting on Natasha's talents any different from Johnson coasting on yours? Because I feel guilty about it. Because I'm self-aware enough to know I did it. That doesn't change the fact that I did it, Lily. That doesn't change the fact that I'm not the person you think I am. You want to know the difference?" Lily stood now too, angry herself. "The difference is that when Natasha left, you actually learned to do the work. You didn't just find another talented woman to hide behind. You came to Singapore and you built something real. Johnson never did that. Johnson is still looking for someone to make him look good. That doesn't erase what I was. No, it doesn't. But it shows you're capable of growth." She moved closer to him. "And you know what else is different? Right now, in this moment, you're trying to push me away to protect me. Johnson would never have done that. He would have clung to me and made his problem my responsibility to fix. You're trying to set me free. That matters. Or maybe I'm just trying to run away before you see me clearly enough to leave on your own." The honesty of that stopped her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the fear underneath everything else. Not fear of losing money or reputation, but fear of being seen as the person he used to be. "Listen to me," Lily said, and she grabbed his face with both hands, so he had to look at her. "I see you. I see all of you, including the parts you don't like. And I'm still here. We fight this together, or we don't fight it at all. But if you try to push me away to protect me one more time, I'm going to be really pissed off." "Understood." Dominic's eyes filled, but he didn't let the tears fall. "I'm terrified I'm going to destroy everything you've built. Then we'll build again. That's what we do." The months leading to the conference were absolute chaos. Dominic spent hours every day with lawyers, reviewing old emails and documents, preparing depositions, building a defense against claims that felt both absurd and terrifyingly plausible, depending on how you frame the narrative. Lily handled project management essentially alone, while he fought legal battles, taking on double duty without complaint, because that's what partnership actually meant. Their personal relationship deepened in ways her marriage to Johnson never had, tested by stress and emerging stronger rather than fracturing under pressure. Dominic proposed one evening after a particularly brutal day of depositions, not with a ring but with a legal contract. Partnership agreement for life, with carefully worded clauses about equal decision-making, shared financial responsibility, and a specific provision that neither party would ever diminish the other's accomplishments or take unearned credit for work they didn't do. "This is possibly the least romantic proposal in human history," Lily said, reading through the document with growing amusement and genuine emotion. "Romance is easy. Romance is flowers and candlelight, and pretty words that don't cost anything. Partnership is hard. Partnership is choosing each other even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. I'm proposing the hard thing, not the easy thing." She signed it that night. They got married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony in the French countryside. 12 people total, no social media announcements, no performance of happiness for public consumption. Just actual happiness, witnessed by people who actually mattered. The conference arrived right on schedule, impossible to postpone despite everything else happening in their lives. Lily stood backstage reviewing her speech notes, while Dominic sat in the front row where he'd promised to be, looking exhausted but present and supportive in ways Johnson never managed during their entire marriage. When Lily took the stage, she didn't talk about Johnson specifically by name or with identifying details. Instead, she talked about systemic issues, structural problems, cultural patterns that made invisible labor possible and even expected. She talked about how brilliant women were socially trained to make men look good, to do the work while someone else collected the credit, to treat exploitation as normal because calling it out felt like making trouble. Chapter 9. The empire of two Lily Lamont and Dominic Ashford weren't just building a city, they were building a partnership that rewrote every rule she'd learned about power, trust, and what it means to be seen. 2 years after the Singapore conference, where Lily had delivered that devastating keynote about invisible labor, and Dominic had sat in the front row fighting his own legal battles, Lamont Ashford had become something more than just successful. It had become legendary in architectural circles, not just for innovative designs but for their business model itself. Radical transparency and attribution, equal partnership at every single level, and deliberate cultivation of women's leadership in an industry that had historically treated female talent as decorative rather than essential. Their Dubai project was finally launching after 18 months of intensive work, a massive mixed-use development that integrated sustainable technology with cultural preservation in ways that respected local traditions while pushing boundaries of what urban planning could accomplish. Lily stood at the groundbreaking ceremony beside Dominic, both of them wielding ceremonial shovels that were far too clean and decorative to be useful, both their names printed on the massive banner behind them in letters of exactly equal size, because that had been written into every contract they signed. The crowd gathered for the ceremony included investors from 16 different countries, local government officials wearing traditional dress and modern business suits in equal measure, and journalists from every major architectural and business publication who wanted to document this moment. When Lily spoke to the assembled crowd, she didn't downplay Dominic's contributions or inflate her own. She spoke about genuine partnership as something rare and valuable and worth protecting. 7 years ago, I was married to someone who systematically took credit for my work, Lily said, her voice carrying across the construction site through speakers that were probably too loud but ensured everyone could hear. I thought that was normal. I thought partnership meant one person sacrificing their visibility so another person could shine brighter. I was profoundly wrong about what partnership means and what it should look like. The crowd was completely silent, giving her the kind of attention that meant her words were landing exactly where she intended. Real partnership means celebrating each other's strengths without anyone being diminished. It means sharing credit honestly even when it's inconvenient. It means splitting challenges fairly rather than expecting one person to carry burdens invisibly. It means building something together that neither person could build alone and making absolutely certain that everyone knows both names equally. Dominic and I don't compete for spotlight or fight over whose contribution matters more. We share everything: credit, responsibility, success, and the occasional spectacular failure, because that's what actual partnership looks like when you do it right. The applause was thunderous and sustained, the kind that made Lily's chest feel tight with emotion she usually kept carefully controlled. After the ceremony concluded, they returned to their hotel exhausted but energized in that particular way that came from doing meaningful work that would outlast your own lifetime. Lily collapsed onto the hotel room couch, while Dominic ordered room service because neither of them had energy left for going out. "You were absolutely brilliant today," Dominic said, loosening his tie with visible relief. "We were brilliant. Stop trying to give me individual credit for collaborative work." "I'm not minimizing my contribution. I'm acknowledging yours specifically, which is different." He smiled. "That's what good partners do. They notice what the other person did well and say it out loud." They'd been married 18 months now, together for nearly 3 years total if you counted from when they'd first started working together in Singapore. The relationship felt nothing whatsoever like Lily's marriage to Johnson. No hidden resentments festering in silence, no unequal labor creating invisible debts, no one's light being deliberately dimmed so another person could shine brighter. Lily's phone rang with an unknown number, which she normally ignored, but something made her answer. "Ms. Lamont, this is Helen Cross. We've never met, but I'm Raymond's wife, Raymond Cross, who gave that disastrous toast at Johnson Davis's wedding." Lily felt her entire body tense involuntarily. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. I wanted to reach out because I recently read Johnson's book about his experiences, and it made Raymond examine his own behavior in ways he's never done before. He realized he's spent his career doing similar things, taking credit for junior partners' work, dismissing women's contributions in meetings, assuming his ideas were better simply because he was the one saying them loudest. He's in therapy now trying to understand how he became that person and how to actually change. I wanted you to know that your story, both the painful parts and your success afterward, is genuinely changing people. Not just Johnson, but men like my husband who are finally confronting their own complicity in these patterns." After the call ended, Lily sat quietly processing while Dominic waited patiently for her to decide whether she wanted to talk about it. "That was Raymond's wife," Lily explained eventually, "saying that Johnson's book and everything that happened is making Raymond examine his own behavior, making him confront patterns he never questioned before. How does that feel?" Strange and complicated, like maybe all that pain had purpose beyond just teaching me what I don't want. Like maybe it's teaching other people too, creating ripples I never intended or expected. Your success is inherently political whether you want it to be or not, Dominic observed. Every woman watching what you've built knows that walking away from exploitation is actually possible. That they can build empires on their own terms instead of accepting invisible labor as the price of admission to professional success. That's enormous pressure. You're carrying it beautifully. That night, they sat on their hotel balcony overlooking Dubai's glittering skyline, discussing their next major project over wine that cost more than Lily used to make in a month during her marriage. The city stretched out below them like proof that humans could build ambitious things when they worked together honestly. "I've been thinking about our next project," Dominic said carefully, in that tone he used when he was about to propose something ambitious that might sound crazy initially. "I want to build something specifically designed for women entrepreneurs. A commercial tower in Singapore with affordable office space, built-in childcare facilities, mentorship programs, everything women need to build businesses without facing the structural obstacles we keep pretending don't exist." Lily turned to look at him properly. "That's extraordinarily ambitious and expensive, and probably controversial with investors who think we should stay focused on traditional real estate. We have the capital, we have the reputation that makes people take our proposals seriously. And more importantly, you have the vision and credibility to make it actually matter rather than being performative corporate feminism that looks good in press releases but doesn't change anything substantive." "We have the vision," Lily corrected firmly. "This isn't my project alone." "Then let's build it together as actual equals." They drafted the proposal that night, working until dawn, building something that felt less like business plan and more like legacy. When the sun rose over Dubai, they had detailed outlines for Lamont Ashford Tower, her name first because alphabetical order mattered, and she'd spent too many years being listed second or not listed at all. A 94-story building dedicated to housing startups, founded by women who deserved space to build their dreams without structural barriers. The project took 18 months to fund properly and another year to design and break ground. When they finally announced it publicly, the response was overwhelming in the best possible way. Applications flooded in from across Asia, women wanting affordable office space where their children could be nearby, wanting mentorship from people who understood their challenges, wanting to build businesses in an environment designed to support rather than obstruct their success. Johnson sent a brief congratulatory message that Lily read but didn't respond to. "This is extraordinary and exactly what the world needs. Proud to have known you, even if I never deserved to." The tower construction became a focal point of Singapore's business community and international architectural press. Journalists documented every phase of development. Women brought their young daughters to the construction site and pointed at the massive sign reading Lamont Ashford Tower, where women build the future, in letters big enough to be visible from blocks away. At the project's halfway completion point, Lily was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Asian Women's Leadership Summit. An audience of 2,000 people gathered specifically to hear from women who'd succeeded despite systemic obstacles. Her speech was personal in ways she rarely allowed herself to be publicly, talking about transformation from invisible to essential, from exploited to empowered, from someone's footnote to the primary author of her own story. "I was married to a man who systematically took my light and called it his own," Lily said to the completely silent audience. "For 5 years I believed that making myself small was what partnership required, what marriage demanded, what professional success cost. I was wrong about all of it. Partnership requires both people shining equally, both people contributing honestly, both people receiving credit for actual work they did rather than work someone else did that they're claiming." She paused, letting the words settle. "To every woman in this room who's currently building someone else's dream while your own dreams collect dust and die slowly, walk away. Build your own empire. You deserve to stand in your own light, not in someone else's shadow. And I promise you, the view is so much better when you're visible. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Afterward, a young woman approached Lily with tears streaming down her face, maybe 19 years old with bright, ambitious eyes. "I want to be exactly like you someday." "Don't be like me," Lily said gently but firmly. "Be better than me. Learn from my mistakes without having to make them yourself. Don't wait 5 years to value yourself properly. Start right now, today, this moment." The girl nodded, transformed by permission she hadn't known she needed. Dominic found Lily after the speech, pulling her close. "You're changing the entire world. We're changing it together." "Yes, we absolutely are." That evening they received notification that Lamont Ashford Tower had won the International Architecture Innovation Award. The ceremony would be held in Geneva in 6 months, bringing together the most influential architects and urban planners from around the world. "We'll need to write acceptance speeches," Dominic observed. "One speech," Lily corrected. "We're accepting this together as equal partners. Your contributions aren't less important than mine just because my story is more dramatic." "Always." Lily looked at her husband, her actual partner in every sense that word could possibly mean, and felt certainty that had nothing to do with guarantees about the future. Not certainty that nothing would ever be difficult, but certainty that whatever challenges came, they'd face them together with neither person diminished and both equally valued. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Every brilliant, terrifying, extraordinary part of you." They stood together looking at architectural plans for the tower, for their future, for the legacy they were deliberately building, not in shadows where no one could see, but in blazing, unapologetic light that refused to be hidden or diminished ever again. Chapter 10. The Architect of Her Own Throne. 3 years after the divorce, Lily Lamont stood on a stage in Geneva accepting the Global Innovation Award, while the man who once diminished her sat in the audience, not as her past, but as proof that people could change when forced to confront who they'd actually been. The Geneva ceremony was elegant in that specifically European way that Americans always tried to replicate but never quite managed. Understated luxury, perfect execution, attended by architectural leaders from 43 countries who actually mattered in international design circles. Lily and Dominic stood backstage reviewing their acceptance speech one final time, arguing over a single word choice the way they argued about everything important, with mutual respect and genuine consideration rather than power struggles about whose opinion mattered more. "Ready?" Dominic asked, straightening his tie. "Always." They walked onto the stage hand in hand while applause filled the space. The award itself, an abstract sculpture of glass and steel that probably cost more than most people's cars, waited on a podium between 2 microphones positioned at exactly equal heights because that detail mattered. Lily spoke first. 3 years ago, I left a marriage where I was systematically invisible, where my work was credited to someone else, where my brilliance was treated as a resource to be extracted rather than a light deserving recognition. I thought that was normal, that partnership meant sacrifice and invisibility. I was completely wrong. She gestured to Dominic standing beside her. Real partnership means standing together visibly, sharing credit honestly even when it's uncomfortable, building something neither person could build alone while ensuring everyone knows both names equally. Dominic and I founded Lamont Ashford on one principle: excellence never requires someone being diminished. Dominic took his microphone. This award recognizes our sustainable urban development work, but it represents something larger. What happens when talented people collaborate as genuine equals? Every project we've built has both our fingerprints, both our visions, both our names in letters of equal size. They accepted the award together, each hand on the sculpture, the photograph capturing perfect equal partnership. During the reception, Lily noticed Johnson across the room. He looked comfortable now, no longer carrying the weight of pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was with Beth, his fiancée, both engaged in conversation with attendees. He caught Lily's eye, and raised his glass in quiet acknowledgement. She nodded back. No drama, just two people who'd survived each other. Later they spoke briefly. "Congratulations," Johnson said. "Well deserved." "Thank you. How's teaching?" "Good. Really good. I've got another book coming out about building ethical practices in business schools. Less about my failures, more about systemic solutions." "That's important work." Beth joined them. "I've heard so much about you. Thank you for what you taught him, even if the lesson was painful." "I didn't teach him anything. I just stopped accepting less than I deserved. What he learned from that was his choice entirely." They made brief small talk before Johnson and Beth excused themselves. Lily returned to Dominic. "That looked remarkably civilized," he observed. "It was." Johnson genuinely changed. "I'm happy for him." "Truly?" Lily considered honestly. "Yes. Not because I want him back or forgive everything, but because his transformation means maybe other men will change too. Maybe other women won't spend years being invisible. So yes, I'm genuinely happy he's better." The conference concluded with a private dinner. Lily sat between architects from Tokyo and Copenhagen, both women building extraordinary things in male-dominated fields. "How did you do it?" the Tokyo architect asked. "Build something so successful while maintaining integrity?" "I stopped making myself small. I stopped accepting unequal partnerships. I found someone who values me completely, and I refused to disappear just because visibility was uncomfortable." After dinner, Lily and Dominic walked along Lake Geneva. The water reflected city lights like scattered diamonds. 3 years ago, you were signing that Singapore contract while Johnson married Gabrielle," Dominic said. "Did you imagine this?" "No, I imagined survival, maybe success. But this is beyond anything I let myself dream." "What's next?" "We finish the tower. We keep building. We show every woman that you don't choose between success and partnership. You can have both with the right partner." They stood in comfortable silence. "Johnson asked me once if we'd be okay," Lily said. "Not friends, just okay." "Are you?" "Yes. He's not my story anymore. He's just a chapter I survived. You're my story now. The tower is my story. Every woman who applies for space is my story." Dominic kissed her forehead. "I love you. I love you too." The next morning they flew back to Singapore. The tower was 3 months from completion. Lily walked through the construction site wearing her Lamont Ashford hard hat, her name first, deliberately, permanently. The building rose 94 stories into Singapore's sky. The lobby would feature a wall of founder photographs, 200 women's faces, united by refusing invisibility. Lily stood at the base looking up. Dominic joined her. "Ready to change the world?" he asked. "We already did. Now we're building infrastructure for everyone else." That evening they reviewed final designs. The blueprints spread across their conference table showed both their signatures, Lily Lamont and Dominic Ashford. Equal size, equal weight. Lily traced her name. Her wedding ring caught the light. "You know what I realized?" she said. "What?" "For 5 years I built Johnson's throne, calling it partnership. Now I've built my own throne, and I'm sharing it with someone who built his own. That's the difference. I'm not your foundation. You're not mine. We're standing side by side, equally tall." Dominic pulled her close. "That's the only way I want to stand." The tower opened 3 months later. 2,000 people gathered. Lily and Dominic cut the ribbon together, doors opening to reveal the magnificent lobby and the wall of founders, 200 women refusing invisibility. A young woman stood before the wall crying. Lily approached. "Are you all right?" "I applied for space here, for my tech startup. I've been working 3 jobs while my boyfriend takes credit for my code. I was about to give up. Then I saw what you built and realized I don't have to stay, I can leave. So I left him and I'm here now and I got accepted." She broke down. Lily hugged her. "You're going to do extraordinary things." "Because of you." "No, because of you. I just built the building. You walked through the door." That night, exhausted and fulfilled, Lily received a message from Johnson. Saw the opening. Extraordinary. Thank you for showing me what partnership looks like. I'm better because you refuse to stay small. She showed Dominic. How do you feel? Free. Completely free. Lily Lamont, once invisible, once diminished, had built an empire. Not from revenge, from the simple revolutionary act of refusing to stay small. She was the architect of her own throne, and her name was on the building in letters big enough for the world to see. The end.